animals. Settle down. It's quite the rock and roll extravaganza you got going here. All right. Well, those of you who know something about me know that I'm a serious person. We'll try to have some fun too, but I want to talk to you about some serious things today. I know that you're here. What are you here for? To improve your sales ability, or are you here to improve your lives? Okay. Are you here to improve your lives, or are you here to improve your lives and the lives of others? Right, be good to have both, eh? That'd be good, that'd be a good target. And that's something to work for. We're thinking about that, because it's easy to fall into the idea that your relationships, life itself, your business relationships are a zero-sum game, and if you win, that means that someone else will lose, and that's not a victory. It's not a sustainable victory. It certainly, if that's your attitude, it certainly won't work for you, for yourself, or for other people over any reasonable amount of time. You want to be in a situation where, optimally, if you win, everybody else wins. One of the advantages of that is everybody wants to be around you if that's the sort of game you play. Now, it's useful to note that one of the ways to become expert at that game is actually to focus on your own life. And I spent a lot of time looking into this seriously from the psychological perspective, partly because I am a clinical psychologist and, of course, dealt with my individual clients, but I also worked as a business consultant for a very long time, and I help people develop their careers. And I also spend a lot of time investigating the psychological literature that pertain to, let's call it, increased productivity. And I don't just mean the productivity that comes along with work, but the productivity that comes along with putting your life in order properly. And so I'm going to walk you through how to think about that. You want to get better at what you do. You want to be as motivated as you can possibly be. And that would mean, technically, that you're as free from anxiety and excess psychological pain as it's possible to be in this veil of suffering and tears, but that also you want to be as open to the possibility of hope as it's possible to be. And we actually know a reasonable amount about how to do that psychologically, about what the preconditions are. Now, for about 15 years, I spent time talking to literally hundreds of middle managers in corporations who worked at corporations across the United States and Canada. At that time, which was about 20 years ago, I had developed a series of tests that enabled people to hire better employees. And there was an emerging literature in the 1990s that showed that how you could test people with a certain degree of accuracy using psychological tests and reliably higher performing people. And because a very small percentage of the people that you hire or work with do almost all the work, if you're a little better at hiring, the economic payoffs are phenomenal. Essentially, for a complex and sophisticated job, and sales, by the way, falls into that category because it's a dynamic job, you want people who have high levels of general cognitive ability, so are smart people, and you want people who are conscientious. Now, for salespeople, it also helps to have people who are extroverted, generally speaking, because extroverted people are, well, they're more likely to enjoy sales jobs, and they're more charismatic, they're more convincing in their approach. And if that's allied with intelligence and conscientiousness, then that's a good combination. I didn't have a lot of luck marketing these tests for all sorts of reasons that I won't go into. But one of the consequences of that was that many of the middle managers that I was speaking with asked me a different question, which was, well, what do we do about the employees that we have who aren't doing very well? And my answer, because I knew the management literature, was good managers don't spend much time with the people they have that aren't doing well. They spend almost all their time with the people that are doing well. And you might think that's cruel, But it's not. It's more that you don't have that much time if you're managing a lot of people, and what makes you think that you have the ability to sort someone out who's in trouble? Now, you don't want to be cruel to them or ignore them or any of that, but it's a very difficult thing to help someone who needs help putting their own life together, and it isn't obvious at all that you have the time to do that, or even if you have the time, that you have the ability. But, you know, spend more time with your better people and hire better people wasn't the answer that was being required by those who I was trying to sell to, let's say. So I went back into the relevant psychological literature to see if there were processes that could help people who were struggling do better. And by implication as well, help people who are already doing reasonably well do even better than that. And I found the conjunction of two literatures. So there was a psychologist at the University of Texas in Austin, James Pennebaker. He did a series of very interesting studies showing that if you brought university students into the lab and you had them write about their life for 15-minute sessions 3 times over 3 days, had them write about the worst thing that ever happened to them, and you compared them to people who came in and wrote for an equivalent amount of time just about the details of their lives, that the people who wrote about the most terrible thing that they had ever happened to them became much healthier over the next 6 months. It wasn't so pleasant for them in the 2 weeks after the writing, but after that they got better. This is in line with a very large body of clinical work, both on the case-by-case front and also in the literature, showing that a lot of what you do in psychotherapy is you help people confront obstacles that are in their way that they're avoiding. And you know, you get up in the morning and you know there's certain things that you should do to progress towards your goals, and perhaps they're difficult and intimidating, and so you put them off, and that makes you anxious and destroys your hope, and also you don't progress if you do that. So if you help guide people through the process of confronting the things they're avoiding, then, well, they get braver and stronger, and they also clean up everything around them and start progressing forward, a way of clearing away obstacles. And there were derivatives of that research that showed that if you had people write about their future, the future they desired, that the same effect occurred. Now you can think about the obstacles that you've confronted in your past as potentially producing discomfort or even trauma, but you could also think about the future in the same way. You know, people are often quite intimidated about the future. You know, if maybe you're unemployed and you have to find a new job, well, that can be very intimidating. And just contemplating the future, complex future, especially if you're uncertain, can be difficult, emotionally challenging, and can deprive you of hope. And so it turns out that if you carefully attend to your future and you write about it, then that fortifies you. And it fortifies you, we know from other research, it fortifies you because it makes you less anxious, because anxiety signifies uncertainty. And it fortifies you because it gives you hope. Hope is a positive emotion, the primary positive emotion in some ways. And you always, this is something to know. If you don't remember anything else I tell you today, you remember this. Positive emotion is signified in relationship to a goal. No goals, no positive emotion. Now, if the goal that you're trying to achieve is too distant, it can intimidate and threaten you, right? Because it's impossible to achieve. So you want to pick a goal that is beyond you in some sense, but that you also have a reasonable shot at attaining. You don't want to make it easy because you want to push yourself while you're doing it, because then you get smarter and braver as well as progressing. And so that's kind of an optimized goal, right? Imagine it's beyond you, but in an attainable way, so that when you pursue it, you're more likely to get toward the goal, but that you get smarter and braver along the way. A goal like that will be optimally interesting to you. You know, in fact, the fact that you're interested in it, the fact that you find that goal meaningful, is actually a signal that it's the optimal sized goal, and that pursuing it will make you stronger and braver. And that's what positive emotion is for. It's to signal that. So that's pretty cool. You can really have your cake and eat it too. And if you have a goal that's well delineated, then that also decreases your anxiety. Because imagine you hop in your car and you're trying to figure out where you're going, and you don't know where you're going, and you don't have a map. Well, you're all over the place, and you're uncomfortable and aimless. You need a destination and a strategy. And that's basically because you need a map. That's how you cope with life, is by developing a map. So that was one line of research derived from James Pennebaker and his work. And there was another line of research that was actually pursued mostly within master's programs, or people who are running MBA programs, researchers, Latham and Locke, actually at the University of Toronto. And what they showed was that if you wanted to facilitate productivity among your employees, you could get them to write about their goals, So imagine 3 conditions. Condition 1 would be people do nothing. They don't contemplate goals. They just go about their business with the implicit understanding, let's say, that they're supposed to be productive and helpful, generous employees. The second condition would be they write out a strategic plan about how they could be better employees. And the third condition would be they formulate a strategic plan that's aimed at how they could be better people. And the research indicates very clearly that it's the latter group that does much better. So if you formulate a plan for your life, and let's not call it a plan, let's not call it a goal, let's elevate it a little bit and think about it as developing a vision. So you have to confront the future, and the future's uncertain, promising but uncertain. And how best do you confront the future, or how do you confront the future at all? And the answer is you confront the future with a vision. And you do that really even if you don't think much, because if you don't think much and you're kind of impulsive, the vision you confront the future with is just an impulsive vision, right? You just have a vision of what you want right now next. And that's kind of childish, and it's not very helpful, because well, you're going to be here in a week, in a month, in a year, in 5 years, and there's not just you, there's the people around you, your family and your broader community, and you kind of have to serve all those masters at the same time. And if you're impulsive about your vision, then you're just sort of flailing around. And it might be better to have an impulsive vision than none, but it's not nearly as good as having a sophisticated vision. And so I found this all very, very interesting. And so I worked with my colleagues, Daniel Higgins, who had been an engineer at MIT and then a student of mine at Harvard, and also with my former graduate advisor, Dr. Robert Peel, and we developed a program called Self-Authoring, and I'm just going to walk you through the outlines of that program. Now, you can go check out the program for yourself if you want, but you can also do this on your own. So you might say, and I learned this in my clinical practice too, so let's say you want to develop a vision for your life. Now, we built this program and then we tested its effects. And so I'll tell you about its effects. If we had kids who were going to, we did 3 studies of this sort, but I'll just tell you about one. We had kids who were going to like a tech college, Mohawk College in Southern Ontario. They came into their orientation session in September, or in August, and they sat down in front of the computer and wrote for just 90 minutes, Just think about that. It's just 90 minutes. And they didn't get any preparation, and they didn't have to redraft it. No one read it and reviewed it and gave them feedback. They just sat down for 90 minutes. We divided them into 2 groups. One group just wrote about what they did the last 2 weeks, and the other spent 90 minutes answering a series of questions related to a vision. And those kids were 50% less likely to drop out in the next year. It was just appalling to me because, although positive also in a sense, and I thought, it's so sad. These kids had gone through 12 years of education. No one had ever once sat them down and got them to write for 90 minutes about what their life could be like if they got themselves together. And all they had to do was do that, and they were 50% less likely to fail. That's an indictment of the education system, and exactly 0 educational institutions have picked up this program, by the way, including the one where the study was run. We did it study like that as well at McGill, which is a more selective university, and the consequence of that study was that grade point averages improved 35%. And what was also cool, this was really remarkable, is that the program had the biggest effect on the people who were doing the worst. And I think the reason for that was probably the people who were doing better had already formulated something like a plan, like a vision. And so what I'm going to do is walk you through how you can think about what a proper orienting and guiding vision might be for your own life. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is you have to think, okay, this is a hard thing to manage because people are kind of down on themselves generally. So you have to give yourself the benefit of the doubt. You might think, would it really be that hard on the universe if things worked out okay for me and the people around me? Am I really such a miserable chunk of existence that all I deserve is suffering, or might it be okay if things worked out for me? Assuming that I was trying to do the right thing. And you might think that people are much better to themselves than they are to other people. And that's true of narcissistic people, but it's not true of most people. If you talk to most people, they're way harder on themselves than they are on other people. And so it's hard for them to give themselves the benefit of the doubt. So you got to kind of get yourself in the right frame of mind first, which is maybe you wouldn't be violating some eternal cosmic order if things worked out well for you, And I don't mean in a greedy and impulsive, self-serving way. I mean in the way that you might have if you could have the life you needed and wanted. So you got to adopt the right mindset. You're going to give yourself a break, and despite all your past sins, maybe it wouldn't be necessary for you to be punished endlessly by, your own foolishness. And then you got to ask yourself a question, which is, okay, if you could have, and this is really a question. It has to be a question, like a question you'd ask to someone you don't know, because you don't know anything about yourself. Like, how good are you at controlling yourself? Not very good is the usual answer. It's like, well, that's because you don't know who you are. So much so you won't even listen to yourself. So you can't just tell yourself what to do. That doesn't work. You have to invite yourself along to play a game you want to play. So you got to ask yourself, okay, here's the deal. You can have what you need and want 5 years down the road, but you have to specify it. And so then you got to ask yourself, well, if you could have what you needed and wanted 5 years from now, what would that be like? And you can imagine, just write it down. And don't worry, some of the things you think you need and want, you don't and are foolish. It's like, that's okay. You don't have to do this perfectly. And one of the things we told the people in our research studies was, don't get obsessive about this. You're not going to nail the damn plan on the first draft. Because what do you know? But a plan's better than no plan, and you can modify it as you go along. So you want to get the draft down, You want to do a bad first draft. Okay, so what do you need and want? 5 years down the road. And then you've got to dream. And I mean, imagine, like a daydream, And you've got to ask yourself and say, well, if I could have this, that'd be pretty good. I might be willing to work for that. And if I could have this, if I could make this go away, and so you got to develop a clear vision of who you could be in 5 years if you could be the person that you needed to be and wanted to be. And maybe the person other people would like you to be. What would that look like? And for each of us it would look somewhat different because everybody differs. We all differ in temperament, personality, and situation and opportunity, all sorts of things. And so, the perfect you isn't going to be the same as the perfect you. But there's going to be some overlap. And then, the problem with that, well, I also ask people in this program, this is another thing really useful to do. That's a little glimpse of heaven in some way, right? It's like the promised land. Here's what you could be aiming at. Here's a good thing to add to it. Pretty much everybody knows how they're stupid and useless, and what bad habits they're prone to, what their particular set of temptations might be. And everybody kind of has a sense of which particular kind of hell they could land in if they let themselves go. And it's really useful to also imagine that as a counterposition. It's like, okay, take stock of your temptations, your proclivity for foolishness, your proclivity for self-sabotage and bitterness and resentment and arrogance and deceit, and then just imagine what kind of hell you could find yourself in 5 years if you really worked at it. And then you've got a nice motivational scheme, because you've got something to aim at, which is where you could be, and you've got something to stay the hell away from. And the more detailed you can make that, the more you've kind of got that on your side. And one of the advantages to that is you put your anxiety behind you instead of having it in front of you. And then you can say, well, maybe you're afraid to take a step forward, because it's complicated and difficult. And you need some motivation to get you over that fear. And one form of motivation is hope. I could get to a better place. But another form of motivation is, I should really get the hell my act together, like right now, because if I don't, I'm going to increase the probability that I'm going to land up in my own particular form of hell. And maybe that's actually not what I want. And if you have both of those working, you got your negative emotion system pushing you, and it's powerful. And you've got your positive emotion system pulling you, and that's maximally motivating. But then I would say too, it's still too vague. If you ask someone, but it's a good start. It's a good start. Low resolution map is a good place to start. And it gets the ball rolling in a creative way too. But you probably miss details. You say, well, what do you want in your life? I had a client once, for example. He was like 45, something like that. He was kind of struggling in his career, and I said, well, he said he wanted to retire by the time he was 50. And I said, well, what do you want to do if you retire? He said, well, I imagine myself, with a Mai Tai in hand on a beach in the Caribbean. And I thought, like, what the hell's wrong with you? What kind of vision is that? It's like, let's think that through. Okay, now you're like a balding, overweight, 50-year-old white guy, frog belly white. You're out on the beach in the Caribbean for the first day. You scorch yourself so bad you have to stay in the bloody hotel for the next months recovering from your sunburn. You have 6 Mai Tais and you're hungover, and that's your retirement? Like, you're just going to repeat that day after day. It's like, what you see that on a travel poster when you were like 13 and never think about it once since? It's so, and most people who don't have something productive to do on a regular basis, they just tear themselves apart, right? They get anxious, they get hopeless, they develop a bunch of bad habits. It's like, that's a bad vision. It's juvenile as hell, and it's just, well, we'll leave it at that. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. Okay, so let's walk through it a little bit. So my clients, my students too, some of them were disoriented in life. They didn't find their meaning in life. And you could always ask the ultimate question, the sun's going to envelop the earth in 10 billion years. What the hell is the point of doing anything? And, that's a pretty pointless way to think, but I don't have to parody it so badly. It's easy to be hopeless about the future and anxious, and not to know where to ground yourself so you can find something that's meaningful. And maybe you're so confused you can't orient yourself. And so one of the things you can do there is kind of ask yourself, what other people do who have a life? Right? And then maybe if you don't know what to do for yourself, you could see what other people who have a life do, and you could think, well, I might as well, maybe I'll start there, or at least with some of it. So I generally walked my clients through this analytic process. And I did this partly when I was trying to assess the quality of their life too. Maybe they were depressed, and one of the things I wanted to find out is, like, are you depressed, or do you just have a horrible life? Because those aren't the same thing. If you're depressed, this is a good way of thinking about depression. If you're depressed, you have a life, but you have no positive emotion, and you're hurt and anxious. If you just have a terrible life, you don't have a life. And then you might say, well, what does it mean to have a life? It's like, okay, let's just walk through that. And these are the sorts of things that you want to imagine when you're trying to develop a vision. So most people need and want an intimate relationship. Now, I'm not saying any of this is mandatory for any of you, but I would say that I'm going to lay out 7 things you might need and want. You might be able to get away with not having 2 or 3 of them, but there's not a hope in hell you're going to get away with not having any of them. So, you might be exceptional in some regard, and 1 or 2 of these principles might not apply to you. Maybe you're so career-oriented that you don't want a relationship. But, I'm skeptical. It's like, you're really that career-oriented? Your career is really going to be that great, and you're really that great at it? Maybe you're just afraid, or maybe you haven't found anybody that wants you, and you're, rationalizing that. Whatever. Generally, you miss any or all of these at your peril. But I'm not trying to make it a blanket prescription that you have to have all of them. But it's a damn good place to start if you don't know which way is up. Intimate relationship. Well, then you might ask yourself, if you could have the intimate relationship you needed and wanted, what would that look like? What do you want in a partner? What do you have to offer a partner? That's even a better question, that's for sure. Am I going to find the person who's right for me? It's like, what makes you think they won't take one bloody look at you and run away screaming? So, the question, what do you have to offer, that's a much more useful question. But in any case, it's worth thinking through, what does a good relationship look like as far as you're concerned? Some of that might be absence of the type of bitter, destructive squabbling that often characterizes relationships, jealousy and miscommunication and all of that, things to avoid. But then, you want to sit with your partner for meals, you want to have children, how do you want to be greeted when you come home? Like, how are you going to split up the career and possibly child-rearing responsibilities? Like, really, if you could have what you wanted, what would it look like? And how the hell are you going to get it if you don't know what it is? You won't even know when it arrives if you don't know what it is. And so you need a vision of that too. And it'll probably start out kind of, immature and naive and romantic, but if you work on it and flesh it out and think it through, think about the relationships you've had in your life with your parents, maybe your siblings, your friends that have been good, try to identify what makes those relationships good, try to identify those times when you were acting in those relationships sort of at the highest level of your ability and you were being a good son or a good father or a good friend or a good partner, and then you can develop a vision for that. And then you know what you're after. Then you know what you have to offer. And so then you can flesh that out. And then too, when you're interacting with your tentative partner, you'll also know when things have gone wrong because they violate that vision. And maybe you'll be able to indicate more clearly why they've gone wrong and why that's wrong, because it's interfering with the manifestation of this desired relationship state that you're really working towards. You want to be... This is sophisticated moral philosophy, right? And practical people are often very skeptical about such things, but there's nothing more practical than fleshing out a vision. That's how you cope with the future. And you're going to have to cope with the future because here it comes, you like it or not. So then you might think, well, family. Children? If so, how many and when? And if not children, well, do you get along with your siblings? And if not, maybe you want to do something about that. You want to rectify your familiar relationships. You want to put together your relationship with your parents. My wife, for example, she set out consciously. I had her do this program a number of times when I was developing it, and she set out consciously to repair her relationship with her father. Her mother was dying at the time, so that wasn't really possible with her father and her siblings, and she made a real conscious goal to see if she could develop the best relationship she could possibly have with them. And it required her to change a lot of things she was doing in relationship to them, and it took it keeps happening, probably took 5 years, and she just had it nailed. She got along great with her sisters and her brother and her father, far better than ever before in her life. Incredibly rewarding consequences because she put some real effort into it, And of course, she was fortunate because the people in her family were willing to go along with the game. And you might get unlucky and be saddled with people that are just impossible to communicate with. And I know that happens, but generally speaking, people aren't so unreasonable that you can't make any progress whatsoever with them. And people generally don't do these things consciously, But one day, these people, they're not going to be around. You're going to be bloody sorry that you haven't set things right. So get the hell at it, And then you've got a family. And while you're learning to put your family together, you're going to be learning how to treat other people properly. And that's going to generalize to all sorts of other situations. So then you've got the family you want. And, you want to think through. You think, well, I don't want to have children because, it interferes with my freedom. It's like, well, yeah, what the hell are you doing with that freedom anyways? You're really so great at your freedom that's the thing you're most, concentrating on preserving. It's generally doesn't work out at all for people. I'm not saying necessarily that you should have kids, although what are you going to do when you're 60? You got to think about the whole span of your life. And who are you working for? And even if you're after sort of short-term hedonic pleasure that might come along with, additional wealth and prosperity, it doesn't iterate very well. You don't want to be the oldest guy at the frat party. That's pretty damn dull, and it looks pretty pathetic by the time you're 40 and downright creepy by the time you're 50. So you got to think about, the whole span of your life and what it is that you need to establish around you to make your life as rich as possible. And you got to think that through like someone who's taken responsibility for the whole course of their life and for their situation in the broader social context. Okay, relationship, family. How about friends, A lot of people are lonesome. A lot of people. And that's increased a lot over the last few decades. Lots of people have, no friends. And even many people who think they have friends, if you push them, they say, well, you have any friends? Like, yeah. When was the last time you saw? Well, I talked to my friend on the phone 2 months ago. It's like, yeah, pretty thin. And, maybe you don't want to be seeing your friends every single night, because who has friends that they can stand that much? But if you could have what you wanted, what would your social life look like? And how would you conduct it? And here's something to think about. Who do you want to surround yourself with? Because often people don't really think that that's a choice. But I can give you some hints. How about people you can tell good news to? That's a good hallmark of judgment. They're not instantly competitive when you say something good that's happened to you. They're actually happy for you. They don't outcompete you on the attainment front, at least not at that moment. And then maybe, people you can tell bad news to. So that's good too. And why do you want to have friends? Well, you want a stable social community. You want people that you can give to and people who can give to you in this form of mutually enhancing exchange. And maybe you want to have a vision for that, It's really helpful to surround yourself with people who are trying to allow the best in them to serve the best in you. And you have the right to do that. Now, you're going to have friends who are troubled and maybe they need some help. And I'm not saying you should walk away, but what's the old saying? Don't cast pearls before swine. If you're surrounded by people whose fundamental goal is to pull you into the cooking pot with them, that's not a good strategy. And nobody has the right to do that to you. And it's not good for them to enable it either, Sometimes the best thing you can do to someone who's aiming down is to say, when you get to the bottom, call me, man, because maybe you'll be ready to bounce up and move ahead again. So, all right, well, that's a warning against an excess of naive compassion. At some points in your life, it's time to draw a limit. And that there's a cruelty in that, but not really, because lots of times people who are flailing about desperately, if they don't have, constraints put around them, they'll just flail about more desperately, and that's not good for them, it's not good for you. And so it's very helpful to spend some time thinking about who you would choose to spend your time around if you have a choice, and you do. And if you don't, well, then maybe it's time to work on your social skills a little bit, because you can, and because you can contemplate how it is that you could have something to offer so that the friends that you would need and would want to be around you. That's worth thinking through. And if you don't think that would help you in your sales career, then you're not thinking at all, because any good salesman, and they're a great salesman, they make relationships. If you have to convince someone to buy your product, and you get one over on them, it's like, yeah, fine, that'll work once. But it won't work 3 times, and everyone will find out about it. And so, if you're going to be a good salesman, you establish a relationship that's reciprocal. You find out what your clients want and need, and you do what you can to provide it. And you listen to them so they tell you what they need. And, maybe they don't need what you have to offer, in which case you should go find someone else who does. But if they do, then you want to build up the kind of reputation that makes people refer their friends to you. And so you do that by establishing a genuine relationship with people. And the greatest salespeople aren't like the slickest, fast-talking used car salesman on the lot. I mean, there's a place for that, and I know perfectly well that there's a performative aspect to sales. I don't have anything but admiration for that. Sales is an extraordinarily difficult occupation, and it takes a high degree of a particular kind of skill to master it. But fundamentally, the greatest salesmen, they're honest, they deliver, their products are reliable, they form relationships, and those relationships spread. And those people just get more and more successful across time. And you know, sales success is Pareto distributed. And what that means is most salespeople fail dismally, and a tiny proportion are hyper successful. And you push yourself over into the hyper successful minority is not least by keeping track of people and establishing relationships, not for instrumental ends, not because you can get something from someone. That doesn't work very well if you repeat it, but because you genuinely have something to offer, and you're listening, and you're meeting a need and a want that's a genuine expression of that person's situation. And if you could do that, the more you concentrate on doing that, the more people will, you don't even have to sell to them. That isn't what happens anymore, That's not exactly how to construe the relationship. So, all right, so you got your intimate relationship, your family, your friends, well, job and career. Now, I distinguish between those. A career is generally a job that has the additional benefit of being intrinsically meaningful. And some people have careers, a minority of people, and some people have jobs, most people. But a job can be fulfilling too, because for most people need to work. First of all, it structures your life. And, I had lots of clients, as soon as their lives were unstructured, they just fell apart, right? And plus, most of us, all of us virtually, we need to be engaged in reciprocal trade. We don't just want to take things from other people, we want to provide. And it's certainly the case that if you look at who you admire spontaneously, if you have any sense at all, the people you admire are productive and generous, and so that's the attitude you want to bring to your job and your career. And even if you have a low-level job, so to speak, you're washing dishes in a restaurant, that's still a very complicated activity, and you have endless opportunity to make good social connections and maybe learn how to cook. There's opportunity everywhere, man, if you orient yourself properly. And here's a good stat. I'm not going to get the numbers exactly right, but I believe this is it. If you work 10% longer hours, you make 40% more money. Yeah. Right? So why is that? Well, imagine that you're a manager. You're trying to figure out who to promote. Maybe you're managing a lot of people. You don't know them that well, because how can you? There's so many of them. There's somebody there who's there 20 minutes early in the morning and leaves 20 minutes late at night. It's like, well, are you going to promote him? Probably. Why? Because he put in the extra effort. And the alternative is, I get paid for 40 hours a week, and there's no goddamn way I'm working another minute. It's like, fair enough, that's your contractual obligation, but is it really such a problem to go a little above and beyond the call of duty? And wouldn't it be something if the returns on that were non-linear, which they are? So that's something to ask yourself, are you begrudgingly going about your business, or are you going to hit it with all you got? And that's something you're going to ask yourself when you're 80. Did I begrudgingly go about my business, or did they give it all I got? Now that's a scary thing, Because people hold back. And the reason they hold back is because if they fail, they can always say, hey man, I didn't really try. But then what, do you want that on your tombstone? I failed, but I didn't really try. It's like, great, wonderful. And now if you give it your all, the possibility is you'll fail, and that'll hurt because you really threw yourself into it. And so that's a scary thing to do. But my experience in life, and with the students that I've had, and my clients too, is that if people gave it their all, even their failures were transformed into successes. And so that's worth knowing. There's something to you, man. You don't know how much, and you keep it hidden inside you because you're afraid. Well, the world's going to take you apart because it's a rough place. But maybe if you delivered everything you had, there'd be enough for you to take it on. And that's something that's worth discovering in your life, It's really worth trying that at least for a year. You think, I'm just going to go all bloody flat out, 16 hours a day, hard as I can possibly manage, right to the point of exhaustion, and then back a little bit, just to see what happens. And that's, You want to try that at least once in your life. It's good to try it when you're young, but if you didn't try it when you're young, try it now. And it'll have effects you can hardly even imagine. It's interesting because you can fail slowly, and then really quickly and terribly, non-linear, right off a cliff, but you succeed the same way. Slow start, incremental progress, but if you're going in the right direction, that'll start to speed up like mad. And one of the things that's cool about that is it doesn't actually matter where you start. Like even if it's in a pretty dismal place, if you start making incremental moves forward, that'll start to feed back on itself faster than you think if you're willing to make the proper sacrifices. Get rid of the idiot habits you have that are interfering with your success, and drop the resentment that you're carrying that might be well justified because maybe you had a miserable bloody time of it. You have reason to feel sorry for yourself, and fair enough, but that's just, what would you say, that's just making tragic failure worse. It's not helpful. And so, your job, your career, do you have a plan for it? Do you have a vision for it? And then more, not so much what you can get from it, although that's obviously relevant, but like if you were going to be the kind of employee that, or the kind of, independent contractor, small business owner that you'd want to have around, how would you be acting? And you might say, well, I can't really commit that way to my current job. It's like, get a different job then. That's if you can't find a motivational path within your current framework, it's time to either adjust your damn attitude or switch frameworks, or fail stupidly over decades and end up miserable and drunk. That's not a good plan, unless that's what you want. So, all right. Well, what else? What are you going to do with your time outside of work? Think about that as leisure. It's not leisure, that's your life. And if you're going to use your time outside of work, what could you use it for? Or maybe you're creative. Not everyone's creative. In fact, hardly anyone is creative, but maybe you are. You should pursue something creative, because if you are creative and you don't do it, you will pay for it. Maybe you're hypersocial and you need a really, expansive social life. Maybe you're agreeable and you need people to take care of, or maybe you're conscientious and you got to find some other things that you can dutifully do to strain against the load. Like, I don't know what you need to do with your leisure time, but don't do it stupidly and foolishly. See if you could figure out how to use it so that you would be unbelievably thrilled to have an hour to yourself, because you've got something that you want to get at. And there's all sorts of things you can pursue, and that's increasingly easy because you can find out anything you want to know about anything just by going online. And then there's educational establishments, and they're not all completely corrupt yet. So if you're careful, you can find some pathway forward, develop a new skill, develop a new set of interests, work out, whatever. But don't do it blindly and ignorantly. Do it like you're the captain of your own ship, and see what you can do with that time in relationship, let's say, to all your other goals. That leisure time, that's a place where you can give birth to the new you, the you that's going to be there in the future. And so do that with some degree of intelligence. On the educational fronts, there's lots of things you don't know that you could know. You should have some sort of plan, Maybe you're not academically gifted, but you've got, an interest in practical trades. Well, that's great. That's no problem. Be a better carpenter. Learn to lay bricks. Learn to plumb. Learn to wire a house. All that's going to be useful. Do something to continue to elevate yourself in one manner or another. It's useful to learn to write. Why? Because writing is thinking. Well, why think? So you don't fall into a pit. That's why, You think so your thoughts can die instead of you. That's why you think. And that's really why. So if you can think and write, if you can write, you can think, and if you can think, you can envision, and if you can envision, you can set up the future that you want. And so that's a good deal. Then what else? Civic responsibility. Do you do anything for your community? And you might say, well, I don't need to. It's like, it isn't about your duty precisely. That's not the point I'm making. It's that, people are cynical about politics, for example. Hardly anyone joins a political party. It's like, why not? well, what could one person do anyways? Well, one person can cause a hell of a lot of trouble. That's for sure. And so most people don't join political parties. They don't join churches. They don't join any local organization. I know perfectly well that if you join a political party, for example, I don't care what party it is. Oh, I'd rather it wasn't the Democrats. Typical bunch of evil capitalists, you are. So, but if you join a political party at the local level, the state level, and you work at it, you will rise so quick you can't even imagine it. Because they're just dying for competent, committed people. And it's the same at any level organization. And, you'll expand your social network, like what the hell's wrong with that? That's extremely useful. And you'll find all sorts of opportunities you didn't have before, and you'll be able to do something that you can tell yourself you're doing when you wake up at 3 a.m. and you have some doubts about the utility of your miserable life, And that's partly why you sacrifice yourself to some degree to the civic community. What else? Well, maybe you take a look at, are you taking care of yourself mentally and physically? What do you do to keep your health in order? And then maybe finally, well, do you have bad habits that are interfering with your life? Maybe you drink too much. That's pretty damn common. And that's fun. And, if you're oriented towards alcoholism, you probably like alcohol a lot. And then you might ask yourself, well, why the hell not? And, I'll just have another 10 beer. And that can be a blast. But, it's a degenerating game, and then you might say, well, how do you get out of that game? And it's like, you have something better to do. That's the only reason to ever stop doing something that's, enjoyable, but impulsive and an impulsive bad habit. You gotta have something better to do. What's better to do? Well, you gotta have a vision for your life, and you think, this is what you want out of the vision. You want to think, if I could get that, or even some of it, I'd have a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And you need a reason to get out of bed in the morning, especially when things are crumbling around you. And that's the vision that you have. That's what gets you out of bed in the morning, It's what fortifies you in the face of obstacles. It's what gives you, it literally gives you hope. It frees you from existential terror. The quality of your vision frees you from existential terror. And so you develop a vision. You want to be a better salesman? Be a better person. You want to be a better person? Develop a more profound vision. Spend some time on yourself. And you don't have to do it perfectly. You can do it badly. Most people don't do it at all. I had a great friend, a brilliant artist. He had an independent career as an artist, portrait artist, that's impossible. No one makes a living being a portrait artist. And he was also a licensed taxi driver and a licensed carpenter and a licensed electrician. And he knew how to pilot big river boats. This guy could do everything. And one of his favorite adages was, the man with a plan always beats the man without a plan. And that's definitely the case. And I don't think it is a plan, It's a vision. It's a vision of the you that could be if you were the person who could justify the suffering of your own life. And we have that capability within us. Otherwise we couldn't live. And most of us hobble it. Bad education, we're hobbled by bad education because this is never outlined for people properly, and we're hobbled by our inability to conceptualize ourselves in some kind of noble manner, and we just don't know how to go about it practically, But I outlined today how you can go about it practically. You spend 90 minutes at this, it'll change your life. You flesh out a vision. Maybe a year later you go back and you think, I got about 50% of that. Some of it I don't want anymore. Rewrite it then. You're a work in progress. Your concept of who you can be is going to transform as you gain wisdom, but you're not going to gain any wisdom at all unless you're journeying somewhere where useful. That's a pilgrimage, man. That's a step on the way to the holy city. That's how you go from every place in the world to bring out what's in you. And you need to do that. And all of that, that's all part of being, a salesman, so to speak. And so that's how you add some nobility to your life. It's an archaic phrase, but you need that because you got a lot of suffering to bear, man. You and everybody you love. And you got to turn yourself into the sort of person who's there when other people need you. And so there's something to aim at. And you can do it. That's in us. Yeah, take yourself seriously. Not perfectly, but seriously. You're going to be contending with some difficult things in your life. You want to get yourself fortified. You want to maximize your hope and your faith too, because they're alive. You want to have faith in that vision. And if you're on board, committed to develop a vision, you think, yeah, man, I really like that. That's something to shrink away from, because, maybe you're terrified even to admit to yourself what you want. But have some courage, man. Figure out who you could be. And then go try to be it. And thank you very much.